Hello and welcome to the GoodPractice Podcast, a weekly show about work, performance and learning. I'm Ross Garner, and this week we're chatting Women in Learning, a LinkedIn group that became a hashtag that became a conference, or some sort of order like that. What is going on? Before we find out, I will take a moment to acknowledge that a man hosting a discussion on women in learning is in part the reason that this group exists. But setting that awkward fact aside for the next 30 minutes, let's turn to our panel. Would you like to all introduce yourselves? Sharon, would you like to go first?
Sure. I'm Sharon Claffey-Caliubi. I've been in the learning industry over 15 years and massive advocate for women in learning.
Great. Barbara, a return guest.
Hey, thanks, Ross. Thank you for having me. Barbara Thompson, been in the learning industry for about 11 years. Spent the vast majority of that in-house, working for a large energy company, and latterly been working in consulting as a learning experience architect.
Great. And we've got Kate.
Hello, my name is Kate Graham. I have spent my whole career in and around learning and training, as it used to be called, and I am head of content for the industry analyst Phosphate Group.
And finally, from the GoodPractice team, we have Gemma.
Hello, I'm Gemma, and I am an online instructional designer.
Great. Sharon, I understand you started this Women in Learning conversation, and that has led to a LinkedIn group and blog posts and videos, panel discussion at Learning Tech. It's kind of exploded quite quickly. What prompted you to do this, and why does this group exist?
It may appear it was quickly, but it actually wasn't even myself that initially started it. It was Elliot Macy. In his conferences, he would hold a Women in Learning session going back to our Clinton administration. He had folks come in, and at one point he had asked me to take it on. And it became real important to me in speaking to the women at that conference and within the industry, really trying to make a change. I've led probably 5 to 10 panels on it. And the dialogue starting from clawing our way to the top to tips and techniques. Most recently, and that's when I think it went on fire, was I did research about a year and a half ago in regard to the industry leaders, and where I thought we had really made an impact and made inroads, the stats actually said we got worse. So that's when I said we need to do something different. We really need to light this up, and partnering with other women like the ladies on this panel definitely are a component of it. You can really see the difference in a video like Battle of the Sexes, where the language is only 20, 30 years old there. It's a movie that came out, and we're still hearing that language today in some ways, or it appears shocking. So we're not moving quicker than what's happening in the real world, but we need to start moving a lot better and more in the right direction. So I think that's where the hashtag Women in Learning and the partnership with the other ladies in the industry, as well as the men allies.
Is Elliot Macy, I'm sorry if that is an incredibly famous person who I've never heard of. Is that a man?
It is,
yeah.
Yes. Elliot Macy has been in the industry probably at the inception or the creation of e-learning. The word itself could even be tied around himself or others very close to his time frame. But definitely Elliot has been really my guide initially in the States. He is global. He has a conference once a year he had that would attract 2,000 folks or so. Right. And really the stats going to like the numerous amount of women coming into the industry is almost 2 or 3 to 1. And I believe that's the same across the pond, both locations. And they come in, and it's usually top students at university to every one guy who's, I don't know his placement, but all of a sudden it flips. And there's only maybe for the senior executive roles, 1 lady to every 2 or 3 men. So that's a massive flip for a very female, mostly female-oriented career ladder, supposedly. And there are tons of men in it, but really the numbers weigh much more towards women. So that inverse is even more than the regular business stats. It's even worse that it flips that hard. Yeah,
I was asking if Elliot Macy was a man because I was wondering if that is it telling that it took a man to start these discussions?
I have to say, and I might be a rarity and I don't want to start, but I actually said it in my hashtag Women in Learning video, is for me, and I've talked in panels, what sometimes gets in the way of women getting in the way of women. There's a HBR Harvard article that states there's a reasoning for that, because there's so few women in senior roles, they almost block other women from coming up. Maybe, I don't know, but I've been very supported by men in the industry, and for me, much success has come from the men partnership and the men allies. So they're critical to the success of turning these numbers around.
What have you been your experiences of being women working in learning and development, positive or negative? I'm wondering how much your gender has mattered.
Gender's mattered. I wouldn't even pinpoint it to the women in learning per se, but it's almost a way that women work. There was other research, and I did it informally till it came out in Forbes and a few other research venues, is that women have done sports, and I don't mean at Olympic level, but 94% of C-suite women have all stated they've done a sport. And that's the only alignment unofficially that I've made in regard to something that's been strategic, is kind of getting that mindset of keeping it on the field. How do you get competitive, winning in a team environment or even individually? For me personally, that's been a big, way of getting around it. But gender is massively a part of the industry. And I don't want to pinpoint to men or women which is better, but I feel that it's different. You go to a lot of the conferences and it's mostly men presenting at times. And you're saying, but our numbers say there's mostly women in this industry. So that's just been my experience. But I'm sure other ladies have different experiences as well. I've known that through the panels. There's always different views on it.
I was just reflecting on your question about, or suggestion that it took Elliot to sort of get this off the ground, to get some momentum. And I think it was an interesting one. And I was kind of rocking uncomfortably whilst you were saying that, because let's not suggest that there's not good work that goes on behind the scenes. But I think what's helped with that momentum is, well, you didn't know about him, but he's like a huge household name. So he's going to get some traction. And there, what I've observed is that when women try to do this, it becomes sort of, it's a narrative around supporting women. When kind of guys do that, there seems to be much more appreciation for there's a problem. So I just wanted you to sort of reflect on that question. I think it's a good question to ask, but let's not suggest that women aren't proactively doing this behind the scenes as well.
Women are definitely doing it, but in my...
No, it was more aimed at Ross, actually, the question.
Yeah, because it's true. Yeah, but it is interesting because I was newer to the industry. I was involved in 2001. And I think in the early 2000s, that's the first time I ever saw this topic come up. And I don't know if other people were talking about it, but it hundreds of people were sitting in that room. And I think the first time and any time I've done it, it's well over 100 people. So there's a lot to say about that. And I think you're right, Barbara, about saying if women talk about it, it all seems like it's a special project. But it's and from a business perspective, I say this from a financial perspective, it's now proven companies with women in senior roles and on boards make more money. So we're not even saying this isn't nice to do. Should be viewed as a business, agenda. We're just looking at it from the learning industry.
And I think the LinkedIn group and the kind of the thinking behind the Women in Learning hashtag is very much designed to be inclusive, not a women only, girls only thing, because Barbara and Sharon have already alluded to the fact that if we don't take men on this journey with us, then nothing will change. So that's really, really important, I think, to us, to kind of continue this conversation in a really positive way. And it's definitely not around, girls over there, boys over there. And right. I think that, and obviously you've got a lot of, gender fluidity and a lot of things that are happening now. So I think to have kind of rigid barriers like that is not helpful. And, men need to be very much part of the discussion.
I do want to note, though, and celebrate that Kate's involvement in this whole initiative, it's been around until Kate got involved with the LinkedIn group. We both Kate and I kind of joked around which hashtag do we want, but it didn't take traction on LinkedIn until Kate got involved. So that's the other thing. I think we need more women celebrating where other women have been successful. It doesn't put one woman down if someone takes something and does something amazing with it. So 100%, I think it was even attempted maybe 10 years ago and it didn't go anywhere. I couldn't find it. So that's probably how badly it did. But I think that's been a real big eye opener to me, is seeing how far we can go when we get the right initiatives pulled together. And that's why it seems like it's gone on fire and been really like, wow, look at it now. It's been in the works, but you get some real creative minds. And Barbara, you've always been a light in the industry as well when I've come over to the UK. So I think we need more of that. We need more kind of exposing and seeing what others are doing to see where it can fly to.
Barbara, you kind of suggested that these issues aren't taken as seriously, or historically they haven't been taken as seriously when women have raised them. Why do you think that is?
Oh, great question.
Entrenched attitudes, or I don't know, the power dynamics throughout the organizations?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above, and I also think it's the way that it's presented. So, Sharon made a point which I wholeheartedly agree with, that if we just look at it in terms of diversity as a kind of a single thing, as a tick box, to achieve numbers or whatever, and we don't think about it in terms of the wider perspective around, diversity in its broadest form. It supports innovation. It gets you access to your customers. I mean, 50% of human beings are women, right? So, and there's many other ways that we can use this narrative to discuss it in a really positive way. But I think historically it's been entrenched in, this is a diversity tick box, and so it hasn't really engaged people. And whilst I won't mention the company, when I've been supporting initiatives before, people have said, well, of course you would be the poster child for it because you're a woman and you're a woman of colour. So these are some of the things that we find ourselves
Put you in a little box.
kind of grappling with. Yeah,
but and Barbara, in stating that too, even as a woman in learning, I didn't even see the stats and the numbers of women of color in learning. They're pretty dire. It's not, just because you're in it, it doesn't make you, it's all better now. It's a lot of hard work. So it's shocking that they would say that to you. That's kind of like, wow.
How do we feel about the argument that we should pursue diversity because it's good for business and it helps us meet our customers? That feels like an argument that's made because we found out that telling people it's just the right thing to do and they're being exclusive in their existing attitudes doesn't work.
Well, it's financially the right thing to do. So let's even take feelings out of it. Let's go to analytical speak here. It's been proven that businesses that have women in senior roles and women on their boards, and there's even an investment index in the U.S. on that, totally focused on it. I don't know if I'm allowed to say what it is, but yeah. So it's financially. So let's get.
But is that a persuasive argument though? Sorry, I interrupted. I said I wouldn't.
No. I mean, money talks, I would think.
But you, is it that people are so uncaring? The only way to motivate them to change is to tell them that they will make more money off the back of it.
I think some people
as well as it just supports all the other arguments. I think it's just an additional argument, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it depends. It's like anything where you're trying to convince stakeholders or, whoever it is to get buy-in. Well, you've got to talk. I mean, we talk around in L&D, talking the language of the business. That's something that I hear all the time. So it's a similar argument. I think what floats your particular stakeholder's boat.
Yeah.
So I guess it depends on the type of organisation that you work for and what your key stakeholders are focused on, I suppose. But interestingly, in the panel session that we did at Learning Technologies in February, there was a lot of talk around the seniority levels and the mismatch between men and women, but also then a broader sub-discussion, if you like, around, is L&D seen as being senior enough? So is it actually an organisational development issue, and where does learning and development sit in the order of things? So I think there's something very much there around that whole kind of stakeholder piece that's not just to do with gender, but also potentially to do with learning and development as well. Clearly I'm biased, but I think if people are learning, then that is good for your organisation, good for your customers. You're going to keep evolving quicker. Hopefully your organisation will perform better. But that narrative doesn't always find its way through to the C-suite, I don't think.
Kate, I think that's a great point, because where I've seen weirdness, and this isn't a new thing, but you always get it's cyclical, and you get people that aren't learning professionals leading learning. And typically, if they're pulling from the senior ranks, they're typically pulling men. So it's intriguing to me to say that, is even learning high enough? Would they do that with the operations group, get somebody that's leading marketing to lead ops? Probably not, right? It's the respect of the profession. So I think that's also a key component. I mean, we can't solve it all, but you have a lot of factors weighing in that aren't supporting the flipping, kind of getting better right away. But I think it's only been recent that I've seen this much buzz about it. And I think some of that is related to the, what's out there in the public with the hashtag Me Too. And that's a whole different agenda, but the agenda includes women more strongly. So I think the timing, this could be something that might be able to motivate us all to get things really moving along in learning and development.
Gemma, I wanted to bring in you and go back to that question about your experience of being a woman working in learning and development. What's been your experience?
I've always been outnumbered, for sure. And I think you're right about the women getting in the way of other women as well. I think I've definitely seen that that kind of play out, and I've never been in a situation where the top roles were women. So yeah, it is a massive problem. And
do you want to go a little bit more into the women getting in the way of women point? Because I'm not sure that I totally even understand that.
I think there's just if in the experience I had, women were at a more senior level, but they weren't necessarily encouraging or seeing the spaces where more junior women could come up. Yeah. So then,
without getting political, it's a bit like Margaret Thatcher not having any women in her cabinet, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
It's that kind of.
So not perhaps consciously, but perhaps because the man at the top felt like he had enough women in those slightly lesser senior positions, then there's just an automatic kind of, oh, we've got enough now. And then so everyone's sort of getting in the way of each other, and all the biases that I guess people have mean that I think there's no chance of women filling all those positions, rightly or wrongly. Yeah.
Well, it kind of goes to this mindset in the panels that I've facilitated, where there's always the group going out golfing. Like, very rarely will a woman, and I tried to learn golf just to do that like 10 years ago, and they're like, Sharon, you're going to try to beat them all. It's going to ruin your career if you do golf. Or like the reception, like pushing women to, even if you get a Coca-Cola or something, like go, and even it's better, I think, in Europe than it is in the US, but just going out to the pub or going out for a drink creates a camaraderie that sometimes, you bring up your comrades, you bring up people you trust and know. And if you're not in the mix of that, or the one woman that is, if she doesn't bring in other women, it's really, I will say where I've got great support from women is in reaching out, just saying, hey, can you give me a quote on, maybe my role in learning? And, it was something that it was frightening to do, but the comments that came back, and that's where kind of women letting women know what their respect is of each other and why we're not pushing each other forward in initiatives. It may be because men think we don't want to do that, or it may be because we haven't done it. I don't know the reason, but once you do it, wow. I mean, let me tell you, when I got some of those quotes back, it just made me feel like I had a network, like a tribe of people, if we use the terminology they want to throw out. But I've definitely seen women getting in the way of women because they think, if I bring someone else up, does that mean I have to go?
But also women have their own biases against women. And this has been proven so many times. So then there's that extra, when I first heard that, I was completely shocked, but it's true. So yeah. So yeah.
I think there's two types of professionals, though. I mean, there's, I've always tended, and I don't know what the other side is, but women that have done sports, have done team things, or like, I tend not to go through some of the grief that I've gone through professionally with women that have just kind of stayed in their own world and just done what's best for them. So I don't know the reasoning behind that, but I just felt more of a partnership with gals that I felt like treated the experience and the relationship like a team mind.
Yeah.
It feels like there's a tension between some sort of intense competition for senior positions, and the other side is the cooperative, almost tribalism. Like, come on, guys, if we all stick together, we can climb the ladder together. The golfing example that you shared is really telling, because I can imagine a lot of men who I know who'd be very annoyed to lose at golf to a woman. And I could easily see that spilling into the work.
So do I. I play golf and I love being men too.
I'm going to have to learn from you. I can teach you all fencing, but mostly in fencing, there's a lot more men than women. So I get I get really geared up.
You can rest assured you would all beat me at golf without difficulty. Kate, you were about to come in there, I think.
Yeah, so the nice thing, I mean, that, you know, some of that is obviously the kind of the women blocking women, all of that is quite negative, and then the kind of the really positive aspect of what is starting with all of this is that there's a lot of enablement going on. So within the LinkedIn group, I mean, I know it's only a LinkedIn group, right? It's not going to change the world on its own, but it's go where the people are. It was a place to start it, right? And it's given a space where we're getting kind of people asking for other women to speak on panels, because otherwise they're going to end up with a bunch of middle-aged white guys on a panel. I mean, my boss ended up on a panel for a HR conference last year where there were more men named David on the lineup than there were women. You know, and that's awful. You know, that's awful. And he felt terrible. And it's, you know, it's for a HR conference. And so, you know, we're getting requests for, you know, people to contribute to like podcasts or help out with things or share their experiences or help with articles. And that's really great. And it's not that men are excluded from that conversation by any stretch, but there's a kind of very positive vibe about all of that, which hopefully will counterbalance some of the negative experiences that people have had.
Yeah, I would say our dialogue before you did the conference was emotionally made me feel amazing. Like I was like trying to share the information, and then you were able to share back, Kate, with me from the conference. And I think we need more women all speaking at events. Whatever the event is you're going to, if it's in learning, ask. I think people don't think to bring it up, but it's a topic. So, hey, can we get 15 minutes to talk about women in learning? And you know, Kate and I, and there's other folks doing it out there, I'm sure, someplace, somewhere. I think that's really what's going to get this to spread with that LinkedIn group. Absolutely. And then we'll see what other groups can start.
Yeah. And thanks for saying that, Kate, because I would hate for the main point of this podcast to be that it's women's fault, that there's not women in senior positions. We don't want to say in that tone. And
I think that's where the conversation has to try and be positive, right? And I've had, interestingly, since this all kind of started, I have had some pretty shocking stories kind of come through to me privately, which I've been really surprised at, sort of tales of sexism and things.
I could share some, but I won't.
Yeah, so could I.
And it's like, whoa.
I couldn't.
Kind of quite eye-opening. And I mean, that's interesting in itself, isn't
yeah,
it?
I know.
And the phrase I used to my friend was, "Oh, I've been really lucky that I haven't experienced any of that." And I stopped and went, no, Kate, to myself, it isn't about luck. Can't be about luck. It should not be about luck. You know, nobody should experience those things, like men or women. And it shouldn't just be about, I've been lucky enough to work in nice organizations with nice people. You know, that should not be what it comes down to. So that in and of itself was quite a reflective process. So yeah, it feels there's quite a positive vibe about it all at the moment. And hopefully the conversation will extend and be quite inclusive.
I wasn't joking when I said that. When the Me Too movement started, I was talking to my wife about this. Like, I've never heard anything like this. And she was like, I could give you 5 examples right now that I have seen personally without even thinking about it, you know?
Right.
And I think it's a problem that a lot of men have, is that they don't even see it happening.
Well, it hasn't happened to them. So in fairness, you don't know what you don't know. And I would say the bulk, like I said, men are allies, but the ones that aren't, man, are they bad. And I hate to say it even to you, Kate, it may just be a matter of time. Something will pop up. You know, I've done some panels where we've had discussions, and one gal said, well, until I hit this level or age, I didn't experience anything. And I thought it was baloney until it hit me. So
we
that's
had
the
that
other
discussion
thing
about age as well. That's an interesting angle to the whole bias piece.
Yeah.
So I'm a little conscious of time. I wonder if we could share some advice for women in learning. And Barbara, I'll maybe come to you first.
Oh, there's quite a few things front of mind, but one of the things that we need to be mindful of is considering our narrative. So, you know, when women do things, there's a very professional way in which you have that conversation. So I don't think any woman should tell another woman that they're bossy, nor should a man tell a woman that they're bossy, and really think about the context of that, because, you know, if, for example, people hear that to be quite a common narrative and they're sort of outside that circle, i.e. men, then they're going to think that that's a narrative that they can use. I think we need to be really mindful of the way that we sort of talk about ourselves and around other women. I think the other thing is that I have some empathy with the whole statement around, you know, you can't be what you can't see. Obviously that kind of resonates with me, but also if we sit and wait for that to happen, then we'll be a long time waiting. So I think we just need to take...
Could you explain what that means? You can't be what you can't see?
Yeah, so, you know, I don't know quite where it came from, but it's essentially, you know, it might be that you're trying to get into, I don't know, maybe working in fintech, right? And you're a woman, that they have real issues with trying to attract senior women as well. And if you can't see women doing that role, you might think, actually, that's not the right environment for me. So that's kind of what it...
self-selection takes place at that point.
Sorry?
There's a sort of self-selection bias that comes out there.
Yeah, there's probably some of that.
Do this, so
a little bit of imposter syndrome possibly as well, a kind of variety of things. But so I have empathy for the notion, but what I'm saying is that if we kind of sit and wait for that representation to happen, then, you know, we'll be waiting quite some time. So we kind of need to sort of take the baton and run with it. And then the last thing that I would say is that if we know about the proportionality of women doing support roles versus kind of senior roles, but I think that what we need to do is not look at roles so much and look at what we bring to the table, and therefore we might have a different relationship with that. I mean, of course, there's a kind of the hiring situation which we can't fix overnight, but we can lean in and think about, okay, the role is kind of head of L&D or it's this and that and the other. What skills can I personally bring to the table and kind of throw yourself into the process? Those are a couple of things that are front of mind.
Oh, in the sense of you might see that role's coming up, someone's talking about moving on or retiring or something, and you would think about what would I need to do to position myself for that role.
Yeah, you might think that I've done this myself. I might think, this role has come available and it's a senior role. And I just think, what's my likelihood of getting it? And so I don't put myself through the process. If I had reframed that and thought about what skills do I have that will allow me to do that job and do a very good job, then I would have probably had a different reaction to going forward.
Yeah, interesting. Anyone else want to share any advice for women in learning?
I guess I would just keep it, and I said this previously as well, is engage, educate, and empower. And what I mean by that is engage is network. It's been through, I think they said only 4 to 7% of people get jobs or roles through recruiters, and mostly it's all networking. So, and I don't know where to cite that to, but I've seen it a couple of times. So engage with the online forums, engage with physically going. And I feel like the folks that I've met in the UK at some of the learning tech conferences and LPI, they're like family. Like I feel like I go to a reunion. And that's the only way that you're going to really permeate in and see where, what, how, when. And then you want to educate, and you want to educate others. And I think that's what we're doing in this podcast right now, by making an awareness and educating and looking at online websites and tools and resources. Cheryl Clemens offered her story tagger. We're trying to get other technology companies to volunteer to put stuff together so we can educate. And then lastly, empower is, I've learned so much from Barbara through the years, believe it or not, and we're not even closely working together. Kate's taught me a lot, and many of the other, women that sent me notes and quotes through my career when I needed it. That was empowerment. So I'm going to do my best to turn around, empower others, and it's this amazing feeling, as well as success. So even like career-wise, what can we do to empower each other?
Kate and Gemma, do you have any advice for men in learning? Oh, we can't hear you, Kate.
Oh, no.
That's a metaphor for what happens to women in the workplace. They're robbed of their voice.
So Ross, you're a great example of a man in learning.
Thank you.
You're holding this podcast, and Don Taylor's been a great advocate, as well as Elliot Macy, as well as these super super senior folks in learning and development, Nigel Payne, I think have the men kind of modeled that way of phenomenal men in learning. And I think that's a big component of success there too. Gemma, I don't know what your experience is.
Yeah, I think, I mean, Ross has been brilliant because he's been asking me to get involved. And I think that just opening up opportunities whenever they pop up is a really great way of allowing women to just be there and be part of the conversation. And actually, one of my points for advice for giving women in learning, and perhaps something that men might also support, is what Barbara was saying with the narrative. I hear so many women, and I do it as well, but apologise all the time for what they're doing. Why are they apologising for doing all this great work? It's just a continual stream of apology and deferring to others because they're not quite sure. So it's that building confidence, and I think men could really help that. And if you're really conscious of the words and the way that you speak about yourself, I think that then just reflects back, and you've got this continual positive cycle of confidence. Yeah, I think that's what it is.
I kind of made a joke earlier on about interrupting, and I do interrupt a lot on this podcast. Partly that's because we only ever have half an hour each week, and we normally have 5 or 6 things to get through, and I need to move the conversation on. But I am trying to restrain that impulse from time to time, and I think my advice to men would just be to shut up sometimes, that you have been raised in a culture which values your opinion, and that you are urged to fulfill that role as quickly as you can. Maybe consider not doing that. I now don't want to have the last word. So would anyone like to share anything else?
That's really interesting what you were saying about speaking to your wife and just suddenly realizing that you had no idea what women experience, and maybe men talking to more women about what they experience on a daily basis. How does what's going on, from even in a meeting, or what's going on when they interact with clients, like what are they experiencing, and just finding out more, being more and more aware. I mean, that can only be a positive thing.
Just to even check in, but even to engage the men in this is like, ask men in learning and women in learning, share with someone and just share your experiences. The apologizing, the thanks. Until I started on TV, I didn't realize how many times in my email I say thank you for me giving them stuff. What? And I do think it's what Barbara had explained. So a call to action would be neat is, let's, as a result of this podcast, increase awareness of what's really happening. That'd be great.
I think that's great. I really love the comments by all three of you. I think I'm a bit of a nerd, and I really like to understand human behaviour. And I think that there's some beautiful gems that you can get from, listen to recording of a webinar. Not the one-to-many when you're, just having a webinar. The way that people will engage when they come on the call. Observing a live meeting, look at those interactions and look at the micro inequities and things like that. You'll get so much rich data from that. So I think people leaning in and being curious, it will definitely open up eyes.
Great. We should say for the listeners at home that we have lost Kate at this point. She hasn't died, but she has dropped off the call. But we will wrap things up with a very quick round of what I learned this week, where we share something we picked up over the past 7 days. Gemma, would you like to go first?
Mine's a bit off the wall, but I listened to a podcast today actually about puffins. There's 40,000 pairs of puffins that live on a tiny little volcanic island just off the coast of Fife in Scotland, just north of where I am right now. And I didn't realise this, but they nest in underground burrows, and apparently they're so tiny you can fit them in your pocket. Did not know that. I thought they were as big as a penguin, but no.
That is a top fact.
Yes.
I used to live in Orkney in the north of Scotland, which is also famous for puffins, and I could have sworn they were bigger, but when I lived there I was much smaller, so it could be that, yeah. Sharon, do you want to share something?
I'm looking. I had 2 really cool fortune cookie sayings that were massively inspirational that I just learned this week, and I even took a picture of them. So I may send that to you, Ross, but it's more like, right when you don't think you have the strength to get through something, you can almost achieve your greatest accomplishments. So I will send it on, but that was the point of and I saved them like from like last weekend, dinner or something. And I was like, this is inspirational. And then when you ask that question, so I would say even keep your eyes open. You might get this bit of information like you just shared from all around. But fortune cookie info.
Very in keeping with our topic. Can you hear us?
Hello, I can hear you.
Yay!
Oh man, I'm so sorry. My laptop just literally switched itself off. I thought,
we are just in the middle of what I learned this week.
Oh, okay.
Barbara, do you want to go next to give Kate time to catch her breath?
Sure. So long before architect became part of the title for learning, I've been fascinated by architecture, especially living in London, and the frictionless design between old and new. So I stumbled on this perspective rather than learning. I suppose learning perspective is the same thing, which is what is architecture? And I'll just read out this little passage. So the short response is the built images of ourselves, which I thought was really intriguing. And then it goes on to say, in a world of fluid virtual values, architecture endures. The images that you, your work, your city and your country create by building will more than likely outlive you. Buildings are the most important traces we leave behind as people. And then the last comment is, architecture is a collective selfie. And I thought it was a beautiful perspective on architecture, and very analogous, I thought, some of that to kind of the world of learning as well.
And this discussion as well, I think.
Yeah,
that's it.
Because I love Neil Gavin's look up hashtag. Whenever I'm in London, I'm always, it's because you're right. It's old, new, old.
Yeah.
Lovely. That's really nice.
Kate, do you want to share something?
So I have recently finished listening to, not reading, Carol Dweck's Mindset book, but she has some exercises at the end which I'd kind of left. I thought, I finished that, but I was in the car the other day and I was listening to it, and she was talking about an exercise that they did with some kids around basically naming and personifying their fixed mindset versus their growth mindset. So it turns out my fixed mindset is a very temperamental lady called Scarlett. had this realization while I was driving and listening to this book. So it's absolutely fascinating to actually work through some of the exercises as well, because rather than just kind of passively letting the words wash over me, actually, as a learning experience to go through those exercises at the end, really kind of made me realize where some of my fixed mindset characteristics sit. And actually the exercise that they've done with these kids where they kind of personified them really helped them kind of combat them and balance them out. So I'm going to see how I do with doing battle with Scarlett.
Brilliant. I love that.
That's great.
Cool. I'll go very quick. And I was taking part in a study over the past year. I had a researcher interview me about my behavior online, and then they looked at Facebook and Twitter and these kind of things. Why is everyone laughing? I still don't understand. So I was sent the transcripts of my interviews, and what a load of incoherent rubbish. I do not speak in complete sentences. It's easy to laugh at Donald Trump when you see what he says written down. I have far more sympathy for him now because it's all hums and haws, and then I changed topic halfway through, and it was just garbage, basically. So,
well, you don't do that on the podcast, so
yeah.
I did it now. I just reeled off rather than completing the thought. I could hear myself.
It's authentic. It's the authentic you, and that's what's believable. So maybe that's why.
Nobody speaks in complete sentences.
Right. You're all very kind. And that's it. That's all from us. If you'd like to get in touch with any of us, I'm on Twitter at RossGarnerGP. Gemma is...
I'm on Twitter at Gemma Towsey.
Everyone else, would you like to share your Twitter handles and anything else of interest, things you want to plug or anything like that? Sharon?
I don't know off the top of my head. Isn't that terrible? I think I'm at Sharon_Kellyuzi. But you can find me. I'm on the hashtag Women in Learning group. So please look for me. I'm the only Sharon Claffey Kellyuzi. So
Clearly.
Thank you.
Barbara, you're on Twitter?
I am on Twitter. I'm on Twitter, unhelpfully not as Barbara Thompson, but as Carib, Carib, celebrating my Caribbean roots. So Carib Thompson.
And Kate?
I'm at Kate Graham 23 on Twitter, and the Women in Learning LinkedIn group is open to all. We already have just shy of 500 members, and it's growing all the time. Unfortunately, because of the way that LinkedIn works, you have to request to join. That's not like a screening process, but it's very inclusive. But if you search #Women in Learning on LinkedIn, you'll find it.
Great. And the stats I think we were talking about earlier on about the proportion of women in support roles versus senior roles, that was from Don Taylor's research that he did earlier this year, I think, or the end of last year.
Twice, so that's where we saw that it went down. Exactly.
Right. Great.
And the link to his article that discusses the stats in more detail is either on his profile on LinkedIn or is also in the discussion thread on the LinkedIn.
So
we'll put in the
help us
show notes
change
for this
that.
episode as well.
Yeah, we want to change the stat to go up, right?
Great. And finally, if you'd like to find out anything more about Good Practice, including details of our performance support toolkit for leaders and managers or our e-learning, visit goodpractice.com. You can also tweet at Good Practice or at Good Practice AUS. I'd like to thank you all for taking part today. I really appreciate it. It was good fun.
Thank you so much. I'm such a fan.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the invitation so much. This is fabulous. Nice to meet you all.
And you. And thanks everyone at home for
Likewise.
listening.